talking about a cold hard murder, you know, and mayhem and assault and robbery and rape.
Maintaining a normal livelihood at the same time. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde completely, I mean, because even my own mother didn't suspect.
Just a happenstance, haphazard murder spree of a year. It was 50 weeks of planned killing.
Can you imagine the victory or the coup that if I'd wanted to stop, it would have been if I'd have said, Mom, I killed those girls. You know, your son killed the co-eds. What do you think of that? And you did it, and we did it, I did it. We did it together.
Meet Ed Kemper, also known as the co-ed killer, was a giant of a man, towering around the 6'9" mark. And with an IQ of 145, he was clearly an intelligent man too. He was known to have killed no less than 10 people during the late 60s to early 70s. His later confessions includes murdering a group of hitchhikers, and for the murders of his mother and her friend. Join me as we explore the life and crimes of Ed Kemper. Welcome to Simply Told. Ed Kemper was born in California on the 18th of December 1948, to Mom, Clarnell Elizabeth Kemper, and Dad, Edmund Emil Kemper II, an ex-World War II veteran. His mother was an alcoholic who was suffering from mental health issues, which surfaced through her questionable parenting ideas. Ideas like refusing to coddle Ed, fearing that by showing him affection in that way would somehow turn him gay. Ed's thoughts begins to grow darker. He recalls as a youngster he liked popping the heads off his sister's dolls, saying,
"Whipping their heads off. Their body sitting there. That'd get me off."
In 1957, after accepting that the marriage was over, his parents separates with his father moving out, leaving Ed with his mother. With his father now gone, Ed becomes his mother's main focus. But after living with his mother's abuse for a while, Ed finally had enough and runs away from home to live with his dad. But by that time his father was already in a new relationship and sends Ed to stay with his grandparents. Ed hated living with his grandparents. He said it was no better than living with his mother, adding that his grandmother, Maud, was emasculating, believing she was more man than Ed and her husband was. On the 27th of August 1964, a 15-year-old Ed and his grandmother was arguing over something trivial. That's when he decides to shoot his grandmother in the head and back, with a rifle that was gifted to him by his grandfather. He hides her body, and waits on his grandfather to return from the store. Once in his sights, Ed shoots his grandfather, killing him. After the murders, Ed calls his mom and confesses to killing the grandparents. He then called the police to report the crime, and waits on the porch for their arrival. He explains the reason he killed his grandfather was to spare him the pain of seeing his wife dead. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital, and admitted to the criminally insane unit. That's where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He was later released on his 21st birthday in 1969, and moves in with his mom, who at the time was working as an administrator at the University of California. Ed opts for a normal life and applies for a position as a state trooper, but due to his large size his application was denied. Ed then applies for a position in the Department of Transportation, which he later gets. While working there, Ed was always on the road, where he starts to notice many hitchhikers along his route, most of them women, saying,
"At first I picked up girls just to talk to them. Just to try to get acquainted with people my own age and try to strike up a friendship."
According to Ed, he picks up approximately 100 women without any issues. But during that time, In the back of his head, the urge to kill grew stronger. So on the 7th of May 1972, Ed picks up two girls, 18-year-old Mary Ann Pest and 18-year-old Anita Luchasa, both Fresno State students. He drives them to a secluded spot to rape them, but he panics, stabbing and choking the students to death before tossing their lifeless bodies in the trunk. On his way home with the freshly murdered bodies still in his trunk, Ed is pulled over for a broken tail light. Lucky for Ed, the officer doesn't search his vehicle, and lets him go. Back at his place, Ed rakes the girls' corpses before chopping them up and placing their parts in plastic bags, before dumping them in a ravine somewhere in the Loma Prieta mountain region. Ed was later asked what he was thinking when he sees an attractive girl. He says,
"One side of me says, wow, what an attractive chick. I'd like to talk to her, date her. The other side of me says, I wonder how her head would look on a stick."
On the 14th of September 1972, Ed kills 15-year-old Aiko Ku, a hitchhiker he picked up after she missed her bus to dance class. He chokes her till she passes out, where he rapes her before killing her. Ed remembers the pride he felt when placing her dead body in his trunk. He then stops for a drink before heading home, where he rapes and dismembers her.
One victim let me back in the car. I locked myself out. She opened the door for me. My gun was under the seat. What in the hell am I doing telling you that? Am I a masochist? Am I looking to be tormented further? I'm trying to show you just how awful this got, how commanding these rages got.
Ed decides to up the thrill and hangs out at the jury room, a pub frequented by local police officers, later becoming friends with some of them, where they coined him the name, Big Ed. He gets a rush hanging out with the same people that was trying to catch him. Then on the 7th of January 1973, Ed crosses paths with Cindy Schall. He shoots her, before storing her body in the wardrobe. Then, after his mom leaves for work, he rapes Cindy's corpse before chopping her up with a power saw, burying her head in the backyard, facing his mother's room, saying,
"She always wanted people to look up to her."
On the 5th of February 1973, Ed picks up two hitchhikers, Rosalind Raup and Allison Lee. He shoots them both, chops their heads off in his car, wraps them up in blankets, before taking them indoors to be raped. Ed explains,
"The head trip fantasies were a bit like a trophy. You know, the head is where everything is at, the brain, eyes, mouth. That's the person. I remember being told as a kid, you cut off the head and the body dies. The body is nothing after the head is cut off. Well, that's not quite true, there's a lot left in the girl's body without the head."
Why did you keep the heads? Why did you cut them off, and why did you keep them?
Something out of my childhood. I could put it on an incident. I mean, my father chopping the heads off of our two pet chickens and my mother insisting that I eat them for dinner.
his final murders. Ed's mom was always his intended target. The girls he murdered was simply a representation of what his mom stood for, saying,
"My victims represented not what my mother was, but what she liked. What she coveted. What was important to her. And I was destroying it."
On the night of the 20th of April 1973, with a claw hammer in his hand, Ed whacks his mother over the head, while she lay sleeping. He continues by chopping off her head, which he rapes, and later uses as a dartboard. He then cuts out her tongue, and stuffs it down the garbage disposal. For some reason the disposal unit wasn't powerful enough to dispose of her tongue, and ejects the bits back into the sink. Ed states afterwards, saying,
"That seemed appropriate. As much as she'd bitched and screamed and yelled at me over so many years." He
rapes what was left of his mother, before heading out for a drink. He calls his mom's friend, 59-year-old Sally Hallett, and invites her over. He strangles her, chops off her head, and then weirdly spent the night hanging out with her corpse. He steals Sally's car, and heads towards Colorado. He was sure that the murders would be discovered shortly, expecting to hear it on the news. But that never happens. Sir Ed decides to contact the police himself, and reports the crime, and also confesses to the murders. At first the police wasn't buying Big Ed's story. But they were soon convinced after Ed reveals information only the co-ed killer would know. Ed was arrested shortly afterwards, and was later convicted of 8 counts of murder.
But how are you able to, in 1 minute, have someone's head in your hands, and very shortly thereafter?
Living through a fantasy, however that would relate to that severed head.
After a couple of failed suicide attempts, Ed requests the courts to hand him the death sentence. But in the end, he's handed 7 life terms. When he was asked why he chose to hand himself in, Ed says,
"It wasn't serving any physical or real or emotional purpose. It was just a pure waste of time. Emotionally, I couldn't handle it much longer. Toward the end, I started feeling the folly of the whole damn thing, and at the point of near exhaustion, near collapse, I just said to hell with it and called it all off."
Some people go crazy at that point. I felt it. It was one hell of a tweak. I mean, to just flip out and not know where I was. To be walking up the stairs with a camera bag that belonged to a young woman that had her severed head in it. Walking up to my apartment past a happy young couple coming down the stairs who nodded and smiled at me as they went by. Good evening. And they're going out on a date where I'd love to be going. And I'm aware of both of these realities, and the distance between those two is so dramatic, so amazing, so violent, that really, I could feel the wheels squeaking inside. That was really pulling on it. And I imagine at that point some people break. But I didn't literally go insane. I didn't get lost.
Today, a 72-year-old Edmund Kemper is serving his sentence at the California Medical Facility.